You are listening to A Difference for One podcast, episode number 14. I'm Michelle.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Charisse.
And I'm Cami.
We are the English Sisters.
We come together to share life-changing methods of improvement through a variety of topics.
We hope that above all, these discussions will help you feel that Jesus Christ is making a difference for you, the one.
And we also hope that our podcast will inspire you to find simple ways that you can make a difference for one.
Hi guys, welcome to the podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us. It is our very own Donald Albert English, our father, and we are really excited to ask him some questions, pay a little tribute to him, talk about why we love him so much and adore him. It was just Father's Day recently, as you all know, and that is what sparked the idea for this podcast because we were just thinking about how much we love our dad. He is someone who is a great example of the kind of dad that we wish everyone in the world could have, but we've been so blessed to have been sent to his family to be raised by him. And we also thought that it might be helpful to any male listeners who are out there because we know that you're out there.
So we are just going to start with some questions for our dad first, just to, one, let you guys get to know more about his personality and maybe get to love him as much as we do. I don't know. But there are a lot of things that we remember growing up, and we would like to express our love for him after we ask him all these fun questions. It's going to be great.
We'll be back after this quick break with a message from our sponsors.
Okay, Dad, I want to know what your parents did or what they taught you that has helped you the most in your parenting.
One thing I remember was when I was about to be a senior in high school, I was talking to my mother about my taking a religious class, and it was the kind of class that was a 4-year class, but you could graduate from it in 3 years. I had already completed 3 years and was contemplating not doing the 4th year because I would be focused on school and other things during my senior year. And she did not try to manipulate me or dominate me in any way. She told me that that decision would be up to me, but that I needed to remember that I had several younger brothers and sisters, and that if I did not go to all 4 years of that class, that she didn't think any of the others would either, that they would follow my example rather than the example of my 2 older brothers that had already graduated with 4 years. And as I pondered that, I decided that that was an important thing for me to do, to be a proper example. And so I did complete that 4th year. Other things that my parents taught me. They always taught me to be honest and respectful. And they taught that by both precept and example. They were both respectful of others and taught me to be the same. My father was the kind of person that was very knowledgeable about a great many topics. He was an engineer by trade and education and kind of had that kind of a mindset. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom that just spent her time being a mother and loving us and caring about us, taking care of us. And the combination of those two, I learned a lot of things from my father. He was a very hard worker, and I rarely saw him sit down. I don't remember him ever watching television. He did read quite a bit. But
That sounds familiar. It's incredible, though, that you don't remember him sitting down or watching TV. That's cool.
No, I would watch TV with my mother. We had some favorite shows that we liked to watch, and I watched TV with her quite a bit. But my dad would never join us. He was always busy doing other things, and he was not sports-minded at all. I watched him play baseball once, and it was kind of pathetic. And after an inning or two, he quit, picked up his camera, and just started taking pictures of everybody playing baseball. He didn't participate.
That's funny.
And yet, most of his children were involved in sports. And he always made sure that we had opportunities to be involved and to participate in sports. In high school, I played basketball, volleyball, softball, as a fast pitch softball, and a number of other things, and was very involved in music and drama and musicals, that kind of thing at school. And my parents always made sure that I had what I needed to participate in all of those kinds of activities.
That's cool because you did do that with us as well, you and Mom.
Although I think I inherited Grandpa's genetic of not being good at sports.
Me
I
too,
don't
or
know.
being interested in them at all.
So how did you decide what were the most important things to focus on as a father to your children?
How did I decide? I don't know. I think we talked about a lot of things as a couple. We talked about what we felt like would be the most beneficial, and we wanted to make sure that all of our children had exposure to a lot of different things so that they could choose for themselves what they liked to do. So we had our boys involved in baseball, for instance. At one time, we had 5 boys in 5 different leagues, and there were only 2 of us, and we couldn't go to everybody's games all the time. So we just divided, and we'd go to as many of them as we could, but only one of us would get to go to each one. So if the games were all at the same time, we just couldn't do it. But we tried to do as much of that as we could. One of our boys, Andy, was interested in dance, and we got him in clogging and other things like that. He was more interested in music than sports, although he played baseball with the other boys. But we made sure that he was involved in things that he liked to do. We got all of our children involved in music, whatever way we could. Our second oldest son, Brian, was tone deaf, and he only knew 3 notes, and it was 1 note up or 1 note down when he sang. And we got him involved in a youth singing group when he was quite young, and the instructor said, "Don't you dare ever tell him that he can't sing." And we didn't, and she taught him to sing. And when he was in college, he was the lead in his section when they sang the Messiah. All of the others in his I believe he was singing bass, were following him because he was the best. So
That's so cool.
yeah, we were pleased with how he turned out. We've been pleased with how all of our children have turned out. We encouraged all of our children to do what they were most passionate about. And they would ask for our advice on things like, what profession should I go into? When I grow up, what should I do? And we wouldn't ever tell them what they should do, because we didn't know what they should do. What I would tell them is, what do you really like to do? What are you most passionate about? And they would think about that for a while. And what I would tell them is that if you're passionate about it, then you'll learn to do it well. You may not know how to do it well now, but you'll have the desire to learn how to do it well. And if you do it well, you'll be well compensated for it. So you don't need to go into a profession with the idea of, what can I do that I can make a lot of money at? But rather, what can I do that I really, really like to do? And you'll be able to support your family with whatever it is. And they're so diverse. Every one of them is in a different profession, and they all really love what they're doing. Even the ones that didn't go to college are doing what they like to do the best. And that's what's the most important to us.
How did you encourage your kids to work hard? Seems like I should know the answer to that.
Again, by precept and example. I'm an avid gardener, and I would spend a lot of time in the garden, and I would invite the children to come out and assist me in the garden. I'm not one that likes to pull weeds. I don't like to hoe and weed and do things like that. So I would find ways to garden without having to do a lot of those kinds of chores.
The truth comes out.
So I got a lawnmower that had a bag attachment on the back so that we could collect all of the grass clippings. And all of the children, and I think all of the girls can attest to this, they got to mow the lawn, and we have a large lawn. And every 1 or 2 times around the yard, they would have to stop and go empty that bag on the garden.
Except me, I didn't have to do that because I'm the baby.
Okay.
I didn't either because I pretended that the lawnmower was too hard for me to push, and they believed me and made all the boys do it.
No, it
I
wasn't
actually
just the
get
boys.
really itchy if I touch anything that vibrates, and so I would complain about that. And now I know I could have just used gloves, but it used to make me cry.
Are you guys kidding me?
I still remember you mowing the lawn and taking the grass out and dumping it.
Oh yeah, I did.
So that grass, even if I mowed it, I would let them dump it. And then we'd spread it around the plants, and the weeds wouldn't grow up through all of the grass clippings. And so I didn't have to water very often. I almost never had to pull a weed, but we had some pretty good gardens. And the kids were involved in assisting with that. I did a lot of things around the house, just, the honeydew lists. I liked to get the boys especially involved in helping me. If I had a plumbing project, they were the ones that crawled underneath the sink and did the hard work under there, because I'm an old man. Even when I was 40, I was old at 40, and they'd be crawling around underneath the sink doing the plumbing. And they learned how to do a lot of those kinds of things just by helping me around the house and doing the things that dads do to keep the house up.
That's cool. So you taught us to work hard and got to bond at the same time.
Yes, we did a lot of bonding, actually. One of my favorite things that I would do to bond with the boys especially is that we would go camping with just fathers and sons. And if they were old enough to crawl, I would take them camping with me. So I'd have 5 or 6 or 7 boys with me, and I might have one in a stroller, but they all went camping. And as we were driving to and from the camping, we would sing crazy songs, Bill Grogan's Goat or Pearly Shells. There are a lot of songs that we like to sing.
Marvelous Toy.
The Marvelous Toy was another one. We sang a lot of songs, and they would join in with me. And then in the evening, as it was time for everybody to go to bed, some of the kids would want to go out and play capture the flag and things like that. But for the most part, they would want to go to bed when I went to bed. And when we'd crawl in our sleeping bags, I would start telling them stories. And I would tell them all kinds of stories. Some of them were stories about the Navajo Reservation, where I spent 2 years as a missionary. And I would tell them some of the legends and things from the Navajos.
That's so cool. I've never heard any of the legends from you that I remember.
I never told you about the Yanagloshi.
That doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, I'll have to do that. But like I would tell them stories from the Bible. We'd talk about Jacob's ladder because one of our sons was named Jacob, and he liked to hear about Jacob's ladder from the Old Testament. But it was all kinds of stories. And when I'd hear the last one start snoring, then I'd stop talking and go to sleep myself. But
That's cute.
It put them to sleep, and they really enjoyed that time with me.
So, Dad, what has Mom done over the years to encourage you to be a better dad?
Oh, man, I wouldn't be any kind of a dad without her. It was always, you need to go fix that plumbing and make sure you take so-and-so with you. She just had a way of making sure that they all had opportunities to be with me, to do things with me, to learn from me. When all I wanted to do is lay around and read a book, she would encourage me to get up and get going, and such needs to be fixed. And you got 2 boys here that are causing trouble, and it'll get them out of my hair if you'll take them and have them help you with whatever project it is you're working on. So
She's like, you can read a book when you're 70.
That's right. Yeah, now I'm too old to read books. I just listen to audiobooks now.
You're the youngest 70-year-old I know.
Yeah, for another 5 days.
So, for those of you who don't know, we have 11 living children. They had 12 children. One was a stillborn. And so they're 11 living. And there are now 43 nieces and nephews.
42 grandchildren with one on the way. We have 21 boys and 21 girls. So the next one will be the tiebreaker, whichever way it goes.
So, with having such a large family, how did or do you make time for each child and make each one feel special?
Well, a lot of times I had to take more than one with me at a time, but I tried to make sure that even if I had 2 or 3 or 4 of them with me, that each got individual attention. If I went shopping, and I did most of the grocery shopping through our married life and still do, whoever went shopping with me got a special treat. And they would come home eating their treat, and the others would want one too. And I'd say, well, you had a chance to go shopping with me, and you chose not to go, so you didn't get the treat. So it was kind of special to go with Dad when he went grocery shopping.
Yeah, that was fun. And not just for the treat. It was fun to spend that time with you. You guys also did the birthday dinners with us. We got to choose wherever we wanted to go. And for some reason, I always chose a buffet instead of a Red Lobster.
Your mistake.
I
That
didn't know
was
what I was
influenced
doing.
by your parents.
I
Yeah.
was thinking the same
Ro-
thing.
Rookie mistake.
We didn't have a whole lot of money as we were growing up, and we couldn't take the kids out to eat a lot. And so once a year, they would get a special treat by going out to dinner with Mom and Dad. If we were on a trip going across country or something, you had no choice. You had to stop. You know, we would try to take sandwiches and stuff with us so that we could minimize the cost of the trip somewhat. But for the most part, we didn't take our kids to restaurants, fast food, or anything like that very much until most of the kids were gone. And then we had a little bit more money, and Cammie probably got spoiled that way. She probably went out to eat once a month instead of once a year.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way it is when you have a
Lucky.
big family.
Dad, what do you love about being a grandpa?
I can go home when I'm tired.
Good answer.
We've got wonderful grandchildren, and I love watching how they're growing up in the gospel and just such wonderful people. And, you know, it's such a great tribute to each of the parents that I don't know how to express it.
Okay, I have a question for you. What are some other ways that you showed love for your children?
Well, I still think the best way to show love is with time. And so we would gather together, we would eat our meals together. We had one night a week that was just family time, that the family would stay home and we would talk about scriptures and tell stories and things like that, play games. Sometimes it would be a sports outing or something like that, but generally it was at home.
Or a family council.
Yes, we did family councils. And in a family council, it's not Mom and Dad are going to tell you what to do, but we would invite input from the children on what they felt would be the best solution for any family problems that we might be having. And naturally, as a parent, we would need to guide that discussion so that it didn't get out of hand. But by the time the discussion was over, I think most of the children felt like they were heard, that their opinion mattered, and that they were a part of the decisions that the family was making.
I remember we would sing a lot too, and one time we were just singing primary songs, church songs, one after the other, and we had the door open because it was too hot for Mom, and a woman was walking with her daughter outside, just on the road outside of our house, and she stopped and watched us and listened. And it was really cool. You could tell that she could see the love that we had in our home. And that was something that people always commented on when they came to our house. They said, there's a special spirit that I feel in this home. So how did you and Mom create that spirit? What were some of the top things you did besides what you've already said?
Well, as you said, music was very important. Ours was always a Christ-centered home, that it was important for us to do what Jesus would have us do and to listen to the leaders of the church and to follow them. And music was core to everything. There are a lot of gospel principles that are found in music. So as we would teach the songs to the children, it would ingrain in them the gospel principles that were behind those songs. And we didn't just do it once a week. We had what we called family home morning, where as the older boys would get up and go to seminary and then to school, and I would go to work, Joy would get the younger kids up and they would study scriptures, they would memorize poems. You know, the gospel was taught in the home. And we felt that it was important for our children to grow up loving the Savior and understanding the scriptures and growing to have a love for them. So music was central to that. And as each of our children was preparing to get married, their spouse would come and talk to me about getting married. And one of the questions that I always asked was, how do you feel about music in your home? Because we felt that that was such an integral part of our family and our home. And that was a tradition that I wanted to see carried on in the families of our children. You know, we've got one or two that don't think they can sing, although they can, but they never felt like they could. Probably somebody when they were 8 years old told them they sounded like a donkey or something, and they never
You mean
tried
your
again.
son-in-laws or daughter-in-laws?
Yes.
Son-in-laws. Let's be honest.
Needless to say, all of them had my permission to marry my children, so they gave me the correct answer, okay? That they knew how I felt about music in the home. I do know that music is an integral part of all of the families of our children. So that's what was important to me, and it's carried on.
Dad, what mortal man do you feel like you look up to the most when it comes to fatherhood?
I probably, although Mom would probably tend to disagree with you, but I look up to my father an awfully lot. And I followed his example a lot. But my dad wasn't perfect, and I knew that. He knew that. And I didn't always do things the way he did it. Things were different when I was little. The discipline methods, for instance, are way different than they are now. If you didn't get spanked on a regular basis, you just didn't grow up right. You grow up to be a hoodlum or a criminal or something if you didn't get spanked enough.
You're saying
And
that's what people taught parents
that,
back then?
yeah, that was the standard. You just expect it. And teachers spanked the kids at school, and parents spanked the kids at home. And if you got spanked at school, you can know for a sure thing that you're going to get spanked again when you got home, when they found out about it. And my dad spanked me. I got spanked a lot. And I started doing that with our oldest children. And we realized over time, this doesn't work. This is not the best way. And fortunately, they all grew up to be decent people anyway. And I don't believe that any of them have spanked any of their kids. Our younger children, they might have gotten one or two swats in their life, but not much, because there are other ways that are much more effective to discipline. And the most important is being consistent so that they couldn't work us against each other. So we would say things like, if mom said no and dad says yes, it's no. And if mom says yes and dad says it's no. If you get a no from either one, it's no.
But Mom
So-
always said yes and you always said no, so we just knew to only ask Mom.
And most of the time, that's the way I wanted it. And
You said you were the meanest dad in the whole world when we asked you why.
that's right. Or I would tell you it's because I don't love you as much as your mother does.
We just had to figure out your dry sense of humor.
That's right. But you did learn that you could get a yes from her more often. What you didn't know is that we would go in the bedroom and talk about this. And if I had some really good reasons for saying no, but you hadn't asked me, she would come out and say, I've been doing some thinking and I've decided it's a no. Now, you didn't always know this was going on, and we didn't particularly want you to know that. But we were together in our disciplines. We didn't always totally agree, but if it was important, we always agreed. But we would do any disagreeing that we had in the other room away from the children. So they didn't know that we were disagreeing necessarily about these things. Some things that just didn't matter, we might disagree in front of them, but they were not things of any consequence. But we felt like in order for our children to grow up understanding right from wrong, they needed to know that there were yeses and there were nos. And there had to be consequences if they disobeyed. And if we couldn't spank them, then what could we do? So there had to be some consequences that fit whatever it was that could be a natural consequence of bad choices, so that they could learn from those choices and do better next time.
By the way, these are parenting tactics that are really popular today, and I think that you guys were way ahead of your time on those things.
Well, a lot of this came from books that Mom was constantly reading about better parenting and those kinds of things. And I let her read all the books she wanted, but she couldn't get me to read any of those kinds of things because I thought they were hokey. But they did have some good ideas in them. I just wasn't willing to take the time to go through a whole book to find out what it was.
She should have given you the audiobook.
Yeah, they didn't have those back then.
Sorry, I meant audio record.
Okay.
So I read a book called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. And I was telling Mom, I think that this is all stuff I grew up. Like you already lived these principles. She goes, oh yeah, I read that book back in the 70s. And yeah, I lived all those principles. Well, how come
That's
you
so
didn't
cool.
tell me, Mom?
She told you by doing it.
That's right. You learned by experience.
Mm-hmm. So, Dad, is there anything you wish you would have done differently or focused on more as a parent?
I'm sure that on a day-by-day thing, there are a lot, but as an overall, I think that we did pretty well. We made a lot of mistakes as our kids were growing up, a lot of mistakes in our parenting. You know, you go to school to learn how to get a job, but there's no school to learn how to be a parent. And it's mostly by trial and error and by watching other people and doing what your parents did or doing what your parents didn't do because you thought you had a better way and that kind of thing. Yeah, we made a lot of mistakes. But as we've looked back over it and we look at how did they turn out, we feel like we did at least an adequate job being parents.
Oh, please.
You did a great job.
That's an understatement.
All of our children still like us. We have a close relationship with all of the children and their in-laws, their spouses. And we know that a lot of families aren't that fortunate. And we've looked back and said, you know, is there anything we could have done differently? Yes. Would the kids have turned out any better or any worse if we'd done it differently? I don't know. But we felt like we're just so pleased with the way they did turn out that we're not going to second guess ourselves and say, oh, if I'd only done this, my kids would have done better. That doesn't get you anywhere.
I agree. And I think sometimes the mistakes are part of shaping who you are and who they are. Everything happens the way it's supposed to.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's a reason that we had the children that we had. We don't know necessarily what that reason is, but we're glad we did. And, you know, people ask me, how many children did you want? And I said, I really only want 2. They go, what? Says, yeah, I just want 2 children. I just haven't been able to decide which 2.
So that
Hey now.
It's a
That
really
poses-
easy choice.
that poses the question, which child is your favorite?
All of them are
You
our
can pick
favorites
two.
in the ways that they are. Each one is different and special. They say you can love all of your children. How can you possibly love so many children? Well, because each of them is different, and we love each one of them in the special ways that they are. And they all felt that love. I know that I used to tease Cammie about that, and she would ask me, Dad, I'm your favorite, right? And I'd say, no, sorry, you're not my favorite. Well, what number am I? I said, you're number 2. And that really upset her. And she said, well, then who's number 1? I said, all the rest of them.
Tied for first.
So rude.
Bogus.
But she knew that she was loved. And it doesn't have to be a better than, less than game. Every one of them were loved as much as we could love them. And they knew that.
So while you were talking, I had a couple of things that I thought about from growing up. And one of my favorite memories, I loved the singing in the home. That was really special to me. And that is something that I've carried on into my own home. But another favorite memory of mine was that we always knew we could come and talk to you, especially as teenagers. When we were having a really hard time, we would crawl on your bed in between you and Mom and just tell you all of our worries and stresses, and you would comfort us and give us advice and listen. And I know that a lot of teenagers don't have that kind of a relationship with their parents, but we always did. And when I was little, Dad had to work away from home for a short time. What was it, like 9 months, Dad?
Yeah, probably that long.
Yeah, so at that time, Dad was the person I wanted to be like. I would watch the way he got dressed and be like, oh, he puts his shirt on like that, then I'm going to do that. And he ties his
That's so
shoes like
cute.
this, I'm going to do that. And I would follow him around the house, and I'd get so excited when he would come home. And I just had a really hard time when he left us for a long time. And I remember having to drop him off at the airport once, and he was carrying me through the airport, and I was just sobbing like, please don't go. And I just
Aw.
was so in love with him. I idolized him because he was the best. And then one other story, when I was pregnant with my son, Alexander, I was in the hospital and I was really sick. And I remember thinking, the only thing that is going to comfort me right now is to be able to call my dad and hear his voice. I just want to call him and have him speak to me, because his voice, and even listening to it tonight, is just so calming and beautiful to me. It's like going home, literally. And so I called him and he said, how about I read a book to you? And it was a book that a friend of ours wrote called The Righteousness of the Saints. And it was so beautiful to just hear his voice reading to me. And he just has such a calm, soothing, wonderful voice. And I just love all of those things. And one last thing, he has a lot of knowledge about the scriptures and other things. And so I love being able to ask him questions and know that he knows the scriptures forward and backwards, upwards and down. And if I don't know the answer, I know my dad will know.
Yeah, I used to tell my friends, if my dad doesn't know, it's because we as a people don't know. God hasn't revealed it yet. Because he's just that good. He knows. That's one of his gifts. He knows the scriptures and he knows how to explain them in a way that people can understand them easily. So I also loved how Dad would take me to seminary every morning in high school, and he would take me to dance class every evening, or sometimes Mom would take me, but then he'd be the one to pick me up. But it meant that I got time alone with him every single day, or almost every day. And we would just sit and listen to his kind of music, But we usually would just talk, and I got really close to Dad during that time. And looking back now, I realize that Mom probably told him some of the things to ask me about or talk to me about, but it was just really good for me. I felt always, Dad, that you understood me really well, and I always responded well to the way you disciplined us. It was like the way the scriptures describe the Spirit. It was not a harsh voice or a loud voice, but a still small voice. And that's how you always were. One time I wore an article of clothing that was immodest, and I remember Mom was really angry, and she asked you, what do you have to say to her? And you just said, I'm really disappointed. And that meant a lot to me, just that I disappointed you. So that was the way that you disciplined us, and to me that was a way that you loved us, was to discipline in a way that I think God would have done. The last thing I wanted to say is something I love about you, Dad, is that you always have lived the gospel and followed the prophet and followed the Lord without any shame and without any question. It was never a question of, okay, are we going to church today? Or, okay, are we going to read our scriptures today? Are we going to pray? No, there's no question. We just did it. And I definitely think that that is why all of your children are the same way today. I mean, no, we're not perfect. Definitely not. And neither was our home growing up. We were imperfect, but we knew that we follow the gospel and we do what's right. And that's it.
One of my favorite things about Dad is that he's so warm and inviting. And I remember it distinctly when Cammie was a baby, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would see Dad holding her and rocking her to sleep. And he would sing very slowly, very close to monotone and very low, The Ants Go Marching. And he wouldn't get through 2 verses before either I or Cammie would fall asleep, because I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would go and lay on the couch and just listen to him sing to Cammie. And I remember doing it a few times, and he would hold her in a way that she couldn't wiggle out of his arms, and get free. And he would just rock very slowly, and he would sing very slowly. And it was just so warm and comforting and reassuring that my father cares about nurturing as well. Another one of my favorite memories is being able to sit with you and Mom on your bed and watch movies, or maybe just with you. When we were little and we would say that we wouldn't want to go to bed, you and Mom would say, well, that's fine, just stay up and rub our feet. And everybody would say, no, I don't want to do that. And I would always say, okay.
Me too. I'd rather stay up.
Yeah, well, and Nicole and I would even have competitions. Okay, who's doing it better? Oh, yeah, I'm definitely rubbing Dad's feet better. Oh, no, I think Sharice is winning. Or no, I think Nicole's winning.
I can't relate. I said I'm out of here.
That's true. But I think a lot of my conversation with you and Mom was when I was rubbing your feet. One, I was doing service for you. I was caring for you. I was, nurturing your guys' feet. But also you guys were doing the same thing for me verbally. And it created that environment where I would feel open up to talk to you guys. Because I don't think I was like Michelle, where I would just walk in and ask questions and tell you about my whole life story. For me, I had to have a reason to be there. I don't know. And then I also got to watch CSI and Without a Trace when everybody else was sleeping, and that was great. I also was in a choir that was an hour away that Mom or Dad would drive me to once a week. And it was a really big commitment for them to do that for me and some of my siblings. And I loved that time because I got to, just like Nicole said, have a lot of talking and singing and bonding in the car with Dad. And I remember a specific CD that Dad had where this guy sang different songs from musicals. So it was like a showcase type of CD. And I remember Dad just going all out and belting and just singing beautifully. I love those memories a lot. And he sounded pretty similar to the guy in the CD. It was really, really cool. And then the last thing was that when you would give us Father's blessings or priesthood blessings, your speech and your voice was very specific and soft. And whenever I say my prayers, I stop and I listen. and I hear your voice. And it may be words that I need to hear, words that you've never said, but I hear your voice. And I imagine that Heavenly Father has that voice because you are my earthly father, and that's what I can relate with. And the way that you say my name at the beginning of a blessing is the way that he says my name when he talks to me. At least that's what I imagine in my mind. And that's really calming and that's really comforting, and I really love that.
That's
That
beautiful.
too, and I agree. I want to share some of my fond memories as well. I had the privilege of basically being an only child for half of my growing up years. And so I got a lot of alone time with mom and dad. And when we would go places, my dad would always say, "How does it feel hanging out with your grandparents all the time?" But it was really fun. Some things that I loved were eating ice cream on dad's bed and watching Hogan's Heroes or a Disney movie. I loved to cook with him. I loved playing Settlers of Catan. One of my favorite things was to go grocery shopping with him every Saturday. And when I went with him, I was allowed to get an apple pie from Aldi. And sometimes I didn't feel like going. And I would say, "Dad, can you get an apple pie for me anyway?" And he would say, "No, you have to come in order to get one." And so I would
Good
say,
man.
"Okay." And I was always glad that I did because that was my time to talk his ear off and he would just listen and listen, bless his soul. Also, dad would help me to the ends of the earth with all of my homework, and he's a saint for that. Some of my favorite memories are when I was like middle school age, we would take walks around the park and I would bring a physical book and dad would have an audiobook playing in his ears, and we'd be walking side by side and we'd be silent for a little bit, and then I'd close my book and I would just start talking, and he would do a little sigh and turn off his audiobook and listen to me talk, and then I would stop talking, go back to my book, and we'd walk silently for about 2 seconds, and then I'd close my book and start talking again. And when I would apologize, he would always say, "It's okay, you just haven't gotten your 10,000 words in for the day yet." And he would let me get them all in. But my favorite thing was when dad would help me understand Christ and understand Christ's love for me. When I was really struggling, I just remember going to dad and asking, like, "How can I be like this? How can I make so many mistakes? And how do I change? How do I fix this?" Questions like that, I mean, they're really like, they're from the soul, you know? And he would first and foremost always help me know how much Christ and Heavenly Father loved me. And he would help me understand the atonement in a way that I realized that I can change, and I realized who the character of Christ really was. And I don't know if I would have that same knowledge if it weren't for having my parents and my dad as a figure to help me understand that in the way he did. And so, yeah, I really love my dad.
After hearing all of that, Dad, what are your thoughts? Do you remember any of those things with us?
Oh, yeah, I remember all of those things. One thing that was mentioned was standing at the foot of the bed talking to us after you got home late at night from a date or whatever. And all of the children did this, and we wanted to know how things went. We wanted to report on what you did and how you felt. And sometimes those conversations would go on till 2 o'clock in the morning, because we decided that even though I had to get up at 5 in the morning, it was more important to talk to our children when they were ready to talk. We needed to be there to listen when they needed to talk. And if we said, "Oh, we'll just talk about this in the morning or tomorrow afternoon, if that's okay, I got to get up in a couple hours," that would never work. They wouldn't talk the next day. They weren't ready to talk. We had to do it when they were ready to talk. Brian would stand in front of the mirror by our bed and flex his muscles. And he'd keep looking at himself in the mirror, but he kept talking. And as long as he did, we'd keep listening. And it was a good time.
That's such a good principle to go by. Talk to your kids when they're ready to talk. To wrap this up, I wanted to share a quote that I read today in my scripture study. This is from Elaine S. Dalton from her talk, Love Her Mother, from the October 2011 General Conference. And I will read a different quote before I read the one that brought me to this talk today. She said, how can a father raise a happy, well-adjusted daughter in today's increasingly toxic world? The answer has been taught by the Lord's prophets. It is a simple answer, and it is true. The most important thing a father can do for his daughter is to love her mother. And that was a quote from President David O. McKay. So before I read the other quote, I just have to say that, Dad, you did that so well, and you told us that often, that you showed us love by loving our mother. And I can't imagine having a better example of that than what you showed us. So here's the other quote. She said, "In the Book of Mormon, Abish was converted by her father's sharing with her his remarkable vision. For many years thereafter, she kept her testimony in her heart and lived righteously in a very wicked society. Then the time came when she could no longer be still, and she ran from house to house to share her testimony and the miracles she had witnessed in the king's court. The power of Abish's conversion and testimony was instrumental in changing an entire society. The people who heard her testify became a people who were converted unto the Lord and never did fall away, and their sons became the stripling warriors." When I heard that quote, first I thought about my mission and how when I was a missionary or deciding to go on a mission, a big reason that I wasn't scared and I already knew the doctrines that I would be teaching is because of the way you and Mom taught us. And I did have that desire that Abish had. And it was because of you and Mom that I had that excitement to teach the gospel. And it says that Abish, she was converted because of her father's sharing with her his remarkable vision. And it is because of your love of the scriptures and your knowledge and your sharing of your testimony in word and in deed all of our lives. And I know nobody's perfect, but I remember one time our brother Brian said to me, "Do you see that man right there? That's as close to perfect as you're going to see in this life." And I bet all of your kids feel that way. So thank you so much, Dad, for doing this episode with us. It was an honor for all of us to have you on here, and I learned things that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah, we love you so much, Dad.
Well, I want to just say thanks for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it, and I love each of you.
Thank you, all of our listeners, for listening to us just love on our dad for an hour. See you next week.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If it resonates with you, the greatest compliment you could give is to share it with a friend who might benefit from it as well. Check out A Difference for One on Instagram for additional content. And if you have any questions, comments, a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you'd be interested in a free mini coaching session, send an email to adifferenceforone@gmail.com.